The Manufacturer podcasts are sponsored by Sage, helping manufacturers perform at their best. For more information, visit sage.com/perform.
Hello and welcome everyone to the Manufacturer's latest podcast. I'm Johnny Williamson, editor of themanufacturer.com, and this is the first in a short series analysing and exploring the incredible achievements of the Ventilator Challenge Consortium. Our guest for the first in this series is Dick Elsy, someone many of you may know from his role as Chief Exec of the high-value manufacturing Catapult, a group of research centres across the UK which provide companies with access to world-class facilities and expertise to prove out and scale up high-value manufacturing technologies. For the past couple of months, Dick has been leading Ventilator Challenge UK, made up of industrial, technology and engineering businesses from across the aerospace, automotive and medical sectors. The consortium has been contracted by UK government to manufacture 20,000 ventilators for the NHS. Every member has worked in concert to step up production of 2 ventilators, one existing product from Smiths Group, already approved by the Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Agency, and the Penlon device, which is a new design based on existing technologies. The Penlon device required and has subsequently achieved MHRA approval. I asked Dick what methods enabled the consortium to rapidly create new production lines, coordinate new supply chains and reconfigure equipment, something that prior to this crisis perhaps would have been considered impossible. He also commented on what the future may hold for industry, including the adoption of new technologies, the crossover of learnings from mass-producing ventilators to mass-producing vaccines, and how we can maximise support from government.
At the heart of what we've been doing is a bunch of engineers, actually, who have been following their instincts and processes, and some very senior people who have basically reverted back to their fundamental complex program management skills and get this whole thing set up. So at the heart of it all actually is a kind of engineering, program management, and us deploying skill sets that we've just used throughout our life. The sort of the stuff that you, once an engineer, always an engineer. And it's been amazing how skills have just all naturally come to the fore. That's really been the heart of the collaborative success of the venture, is that a bunch of engineers, principally on top of their game, managing complex programs, whether they be for aerospace or automotive or medical devices, is getting together to get on with the job and trading on, innate or intuitive engineering skill sets.
In that regard, I suppose the time taken to turn around the production lines, to coordinate this incredible supply chain of equipment and materials, suppliers, reconfigure equipment, retool what was being done. I suppose if we prior to this crisis, it would have largely been considered completely impossible. So how exactly did you and the team manage it?
We've done nothing in process terms fundamentally novel. We've all grabbed a hold of our own new product introduction processes, and it's quite interesting between aerospace and automotive. Different three-letter acronyms, but fundamentally it's the same process. So we've been deploying those best tools that we've all been used to in the disciplines, but the way we've accelerated it is to parallel process stuff. So, for instance, with procurement, where we've had to put in place parallel supply chains to source parts for ventilators, we've had just a lot of very competent people working in parallel to get through the sheer quantity of procurement activity and the sort of level of rigor and detail you need to apply into your supply chains. We've just had a lot of people on it and have managed to coordinate all of that activity together. A lot of it, though, has been through self-organizing teams, so that there's not been what I've described a very strong command and control. And clearly, there's been an overall overarching program. We've put teams in place of smart people and empowered them to get on with the job. So we haven't been prescriptive about how things have been done. we've allowed people to get on and do what's necessary. And I think that's probably been a key part of it, is that profound sense of empowerment without meddling and interfering.
So it wasn't necessarily all planned out in a master plan. It sounds more like an MVP, a kind of minimum viable product style approach to learn by doing.
Well, we didn't busk it, but nor did we spend 3 weeks putting a plan together, because we didn't have the time. So we just very quickly latched onto things. So, for instance, the first ventilator that we took a serious look at was a Smiths Industries device, which is made in relatively small volumes in Luton. And first thing to do, other than establish good relationships with the Smiths guys and form a team around them, is get a hold of the bill of material and look at what we're up against, and then fire that out to this larger team to take a really detailed look and tell us what it would take to scale that bill of material up to the sort of numbers we needed. So, did we there put we just started parallel processing, right? Get the bill of material and supply chain team started to work on that. Let's have a look at the factory. How's it put together? What are the test requirements? Oh, right, there's a whole load of a lot of test equipment required. So, we just started farming this whole information gathering piece out to start with, and then started drawing it back together using some pretty high-level tools to manage the overall program, so that you can visualize what you're up against, because you're starting to gather, even in the early stage, starting to gather quite a lot of information. So how do we present that information centrally so that we can see what's happening and make judgments on what we're seeing? So we started to implement quite a few tools to help us visualize the information, because they're exploding it out and then dragging it back in. But the key thing was, the parallel processing, get the parts underway, understand what we're up against, start to look at the manufacturing process, any engineering issues related to the scaling up in new supply chains, the testing equipment, all of that was required. And then starting to think also then about developing parallel workforces. First of all, understanding that we could max out the facility as it stood, and then how do we multi-shift that? What's the capacity of that? Right, that's still not enough. So we then got into the whole concept of building parallel factories, and then start the planning of those factories and the layouts. And that's when we, in order to save time and compress time, used a lot of the tools around us, like digital twinning, for instance. So, if we're going to put a facility together in a very short space of time, it better be right first time. So using digital twins, and particularly that was used to very good effect with the other ventilator, which is a device from a company called Penlon, and that's a very small company based in Abingdon, and they make anesthesia equipment, and they probably make 10 bits of anesthesia kit a week. And the ventilator, which we got behind there, is a combination of some existing anesthesia equipment. So it didn't actually exist as a physical ventilator, but it's an assembly of subsystems from a anesthesia device, which met the requirements. So that's a new device which required regulatory approval, which we had to do in very quick time. So what's normally a 9-month program of regulatory approval, we did in 21 days with the help of some really smart people from Penlon. And that's a tiny factory. We're triple shifting that, but then we started the planning to build more parallel factories alongside that. And I mean, the really great example is the Airbus facility in Broughton, where one of our own centres, which is the Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre Wales, AMRC Cymru, was empty because it was just about to receive a whole load of kit to do the assembly work for Wing of Tomorrow, which is a big research program with Airbus. So nice empty, nice resin floor. And then we said, right, let's commandeer that for a few weeks to use as one of our factories. And some fantastic work with Siemens. So we've had Siemens Healthineers working on this, and they did the whole factory layout, and a fantastic digital twin. So the whole process was all laid out in an incredibly short space of time, days. And then we had the confidence then to cut loose and order all the kit and go and put it together. And there's actually some really good time-lapse. Well, there's first of all a great video of the digital twin, and then there's a time-lapse video of us actually building the thing. And I think it was all built out in about 30 days, I think, or less maybe. Yeah, probably less than 30 days from let's build a factory, digital twinning, and then having it built out and up and running. It's a fantastic thing.
Reading the reports of what's happened in Broughton specifically, I know that I think there was something like 500 people on site in multiple different shift patterns coming and going. I know a lot of manufacturers at the moment will be thinking about how they can get back up and running, but doing so in a way that maximizes the safety of their employees. So how did the experience Broughton and other consortium members, how they managed to produce during this time?
Yeah, well, we had, of course, not only the challenge of building parallel factories and parallel supply chains, but of course we had the added friction of a pandemic virus amongst us. So, as far as training is concerned, for instance, and I'll sort of training and workplace, split those into two things, the obvious thing to do in an environment like that is to swamp both Smiths and Penlon with observers to see how it's all done, and bring groups of people in to understand and learn from the people in the current manufacturing process. But two things. First of all, we had to keep the manufacturing process running, existing, and scale that up within the existing factories. What you don't want to do is have dozens, or hundreds of people then hanging around trying to learn the next thing. And then, of course, also bringing lots of extra people onto site adds to the risk, of course, of contagion with the virus. So we very quickly decided to use some remote learning tools. So that's some really interesting stuff that we've been already working on within the HVM Catapult. The use of augmented reality and VR, so things like Microsoft HoloLens. And we've done a lot of work over the last couple of years. If I say it's 2 years, it's probably 3. And so we're quite adept at those and have done a lot of practical research around it to make those tools usable. So we were able to deploy those tools really quickly. So we've been using HoloLens a lot for remote learning. So we've been training people remotely, but immersed in the physical workplace through the use of the HoloLens tool. I think we've got something like 100 HoloLenses in play, and that's training hundreds of people. So really interesting aspect there of using technology and deploying that rapidly into the process is necessity being the mother of invention. But as far as the site layouts are concerned, but the added friction of having the virus is we took the opportunity to lay these new sites out in a very safe, robust way in terms of people distancing. So if you have a look at the Broughton facility, just as one example of what we've done, there's unidirectional walkways. You can't cross over each other. Every workplace is segregated by the necessary distance. There's a whole load of protocols in place so people can interact without getting too close to each other. And even things like the canteen facilities are all laid out. And it looks a bit like an exam room, but each one of the little tables is numbered, so everybody has their own table, so there's no risk of people cross-contaminating across tables. But their food is delivered in numbered containers for them, so it's all kind of their container and it's numbered against them. And they're all separated. So there's enough space for them to interact with each other for just the social purposes, but they are actually robustly segregated to avoid any contamination. So, there's a whole load of learning from that, which is available. We need to make available for companies getting back to work, things that work well there and things that we had to adapt to. So,
are there any learnings from the mass production of ventilators that could potentially feed into the mass production of a potential vaccine? Separate industries, I suppose, but maybe there are some learnings that could be shared?
Well, interestingly, within the high-value manufacturing Catapult, because we've been doing the ventilator thing right in the centre of that, But our Centre for Process Innovation, which is in the Northeast, well, it's principally located in the Northeast, it has a number of locations. That's a key part of the Vaccines Challenge. So the Vaccines Task Force. So the manufacturing scale-up of one of the vaccines is the main centre for that activity is going to be National Biologics Manufacturing Centre in Darlington, which is part of CPI. Is there anything to be learnt from the two? The pace with which we've moved at? I think the human factors are the things to learn about. Is most of the effect of what we've been doing and the pace with which we've moved at is to do with people. I mean, it's a kind of hearts and minds thing, a selfless commitment to a challenge, and the challenge itself, which is because one of a national nature and a sort of life and death element to it, is quite a grave responsibility that goes with that. But that's engendered an incredible team spirit of collaboration. It's led to a completely sort of ego-free, can-do, get-on-and-do-it approach where people have been a high degree of trust between us all. No second-guessing of decisions because we get the most qualified and best person to make the decision and we stick with it. We've empowered people to get on and do the right thing. That's what people want to do, actually. And often we put barriers in the way of people doing the right thing. So we've lifted all the barriers there just simply because we've had to. Meetings have been short and purposeful. I mean, that I chair a daily drumbeat meeting for the consortium where we look at the Penlon and the Smiths device and any issues in between. And that lasts about 15 or 20 minutes. And we've got some great visualization tools for the data. So it's things like data management, visualization of what's going on, but I think most of the learning into vaccines will be to do with the sense of empowerment, the use of a single focus mission as a major enabler for collaboration. So it's surprisingly, there's not, I don't know whether you were expecting me to come up with some sort of magic formula of complex new systems and IT tools we've used. Most of it's a human nature, team working and commitment and stuff like that. And then it turned around with the help of McLaren. Incredible.
How do you think what the industry is going through and has been going through for several weeks now, how do you think that's going to change the way that we think about supply chains and prioritize supply chains?
Well, I think this whole learning, not just about ventilators, I think it's made us all realize, when we're operating this global space, we've let quite a lot of sovereign capability disappear from the UK. And it's quite interesting when you need it for yourself, then you think, God, we're actually very dependent on this deeply interconnected world. And, I think there is some strong messages here for us to have greater sovereign capability, homegrown capability of making more stuff. And my view is, in the context of what we do next, is that if we are genuinely heading towards the commitment to zero carbon by 2050, that means that we need to be manufacturing stuff in a sustainable zero carbon way. And it doesn't mean that we cheat by sending manufacturing somewhere else, which isn't zero carbon. So we're going to do a proper job of it. I think there's a huge opportunity for the UK to use its fantastic science base and proven technological know-how in manufacturing is to do a lot more and bring stuff back to the UK in an entirely responsible way, create new value streams in the UK, new employment opportunities, new added value, new revenues that can be taxed to help rebuild everything. I can't think of a better way of responding to that. And we get both that way. We get resilience in the UK and we get a true zero carbon commitment. And the Catapult, it won't surprise you that while I've been focusing on ventilators, my colleagues in the high value manufacturing Catapult have been looking at just that. What would it take for us to really step up in the UK and have proper sustainable manufacturing and get programs in place to stimulate innovation? So not only do we get that short-term boost and uplift our innovation spirits, but we start that journey towards a proper sustainable future, which I think will look great, actually. I think it'll look great.
Allied to that, I don't know if you saw Ed Miliband's tweet he put out. It was one of a series of tweets, but I'll read it for you now. He said, there are strategic sectors, for example, manufacturing, where there is a strong case for government to intervene. The crisis has exposed that manufacturing is a national and economic security issue, and it needs protecting for our future prosperity. What protection do you think government could and maybe should be providing above what they're doing at the moment? Okay,
well, I mean, clearly they're doing quite a lot to stop important businesses going under, which is of course valuable, and I think we all welcome the very rapid response that government made to underpin and the furloughing process and everything. Well, he's right in that it's the lifeblood of the economy, because when you have something like this, it does expose the weakness that if you're entirely service based, then you ultimately have to create value and wealth from digging stuff out the ground, growing something, or making something with the product of the first two. It's the only way of genuinely adding true value, and you need true value to underpin an economy. So he's absolutely right that manufacturing is critical to the lifeblood of the nation. And the sorts of things that government can be doing is to help with this big stimulus, help industry to not only just to climb out of the difficult spot it's in, but absolutely keep that torch lit for innovation. And if anything, don't just try to get to business as usual, but accelerate it, is actually provide support and means to get companies to use their best talent to look at the green sunlit uplands of zero carbon sustainable manufacturing. Let's make a start on that big program and use the sort of spirit we've engendered with like the Ventilator Challenge is let's rise to the next challenge, which is zero carbon sustainability. In fact, it's quite interesting that at the zenith of the pressure on the core team within the Ventilator, and we're very much the production teams are at the zenith of their pressure now, but at the zenith of the core of the program, probably about 2 or 3 weeks in, one of my colleagues said to me, we were working at such a pace with such incredibly rapid results. It said, hey, we could work like this. Imagine if we could work like this all the time. And it wasn't sustainable because we were working with 18 to 20 hours a day at the time. But that spirit, we said, Christ, if we could apply that to the next big challenge, like the route to zero carbon, we should be doing that. So huge learning points from that to be applied to the next big challenge. And it is every bit as much a crisis as COVID is currently. So we've had something dumped on us quickly we've had to respond to. But there's a bigger issue that says that we've got to decarbonise the economy. And we all know how important that is. So it feels like we should be treating that as the next, I wouldn't say national emergency. We're not far off, actually. We should be treating it with the same rigour.
In your conversations with the Department of Business and politicians and ministers, do you get the sense that there really is that support to and willingness to develop the sector for the long term, not just for this immediate crisis?
I do get that sense. I mean, particularly with the BEIS, the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, particularly with Minister Nadine Zahawi, who's the business minister, he really gets it. And he's been delighted about the way that industry has stepped up from the current crisis, and he's got a real determination to support industry going forward. So I'm starting to engage with him now. How do we use that learning to push into the next space? And I think not positioning ourselves necessarily right at the centre of that, but I think the High Value Manufacturing Catapult has got a strong role to play because we've been able to demonstrate our ability to bring people together to do something big. So when the government put the call to arms to industry to step up and make ventilators, HVM Catapult's natural instincts kicked in to start gathering people together in a big collaborative exercise. And there's no reason why we shouldn't do that with getting industry back on its feet and focusing on the next big thing. So we do sense within the High Value Manufacturing Catapult a real sense of mission here.
Dick Elsy there with some really positive thoughts about the future of UK manufacturing. Next week, I'm going to be talking to Brian Holliday, Managing Director of Siemens Digital Industries, about one of the major elements in the consortium's success, the use of technology, particularly digital twinning and augmented reality, to rapidly spin up and scale production lines and the production of ventilators. My thanks to Dick Elsy. Thanks to you for listening, and watch out for our next podcast. Why not subscribe via your podcast platform of choice to be notified? On behalf of us all at The Manufacturer, I'm Johnny Williamson. Goodbye.
The Manufacturer podcasts are sponsored by Sage, helping manufacturers perform at their best. For more information, visit sage.com/perform.